Yeah. So I want to welcome everyone to this month's Leadership Academy as part of the SVELC, the Silicon Valley Engineering Leadership Community. And that's what we are first and foremost, is a community of people supporting each other. The Leadership Academy is something that we started about 7 or 8 months ago now, last September. And it is targeting those that are in the first stages of their engineering management career or are targeting getting into that role. But one of the things that we've tried to do is have it be appealing to those with more experience also, so that there's never a time to stop learning. And this is really useful for people at all points in their career. And I'm really pleased about tonight's topic because it is one of those often undersold areas of any form of leadership. But I think in the engineering community, where we often have problems relating, engineers are famous for communicating poorly. This issue of communicating cross-silo is a particular liability for us. So tonight's presentation is from Grace Henson, who specializes in this area, and she has her trademark concept of Alignment ThinkTanks. And with no further ado, I want to turn it over to Grace.
Thank you so much. I'll share my screen and show you some slides. This is not a death by PowerPoint. And if it starts to feel that way, just let me know. All right, so yes, Alignment ThinkTanks and frameworks for online cross-silo collaboration. I've been doing work with product teams for a long time, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But first, I want to start with a story about an online media company. This company was a first mover in a high growth market. They were definitely the market leader. They had pretty much all the market share and pretty deep pockets. They were starting to see some increasing competitive pressures, but still, their business results were on the up. And if somebody, Kimberly, can you track the chat so that I don't miss something? Oh, okay, we'll get into that. I see this question, but we'll get into that about frameworks. So thanks for the question about frameworks. I'll explain that. So anyhow, this company was having increasing competitive pressures, and they decided they would try to do something more innovative. They were going to revamp some of their products to help fend off competitive pressure. Big challenge though. Oh. The sales team was selling something different than what the engineering team was building. So it wouldn't have mattered how awesome that product was. When customers started to take receipt of the product, they were pissed off. It wasn't what they expected. It wasn't what they paid for. That's like, me coming and telling you about you wanting running shoes and me telling you about these fabulous running shoes that we're going to ship to you, and you being all excited about the running shoes, and you get hiking boots. They might have been the world's best hiking boots, but they weren't what you expected. So a lot of pissed off customers, a lot of canceled orders, a lot of lost market share. It had a huge impact on the company because engineering and sales weren't talking to each other throughout the development process. And there was obviously, a lot of finger pointing. Whose fault was it? Well, recoverable, maybe. It took them a long time actually to recover, and they've never recovered their pole position in the market. Avoidable, definitely. If they had been in the habit of frequent check-ins across the silos, they wouldn't have been so misaligned when it came to understanding what the customer needs and talking to the customer about the product. So who am I, right? Why am I here to talk to you about this? Well, my background, I have an engineering and technical management background. I actually studied architecture and urban planning as an undergraduate at MIT, but got very enamored with computers. But I also like to say that I started studying user-centered design before the term was coined. And I'm also an adventurer. After graduating from college, I spent 3 summers on my bike riding around the US, an average of 2,000 miles a summer. So, and since then, I've done a lot of world travel. I'm interested in people who are not like me, as well as people who are like me. I've always been curious about people who come from different backgrounds, different cultures, etc. And I've always been open to exploring that. An inventor, I've invented a variety of different things, primarily frameworks and methodologies, and I'm a strong collaborator. I've always been motivated because of my interest in other people and what motivates them. I've always been motivated to collaborate with diverse groups of people. So when we're talking about customers and the customer kind of being at the center of the company, it's really important to ask yourself, do you listen to your customers? Do you understand what they need? I've worked with several engineering teams to help them go out and talk to customers. And my number one piece of advice to engineers is if a customer asks you or a prospect asks you about a specific feature, do you have feature X? Don't say yes or no. Ask why that's important to them. You want to expand the conversation. You really want to understand the bigger need, not just get into kind of a competitive discussion about a feature function. And expansion to understand their larger need gives you an opportunity to design something that meets that need that can be really kick-ass and innovative. Working across silos to understand what customers need and to work together to deliver the value that your customers need, want, and will pay for is very important. There was an article in HBR recently that covered this issue. They asked people, how do you spend most of your time? And most of the employees they talked to spent most of their time working within their silo, within their functional group. But then when the question was posed, what is the work that you do that contributes most delivering value to the customer? That was the answer was when I work cross silo or when I work with people on other teams. And in this expanding universe of digitalization and the need for our customers and our clients to work cross-functionally and the need for more innovation, not just in technology, working cross-functionally and being a leader in the organization that promotes cross-silo or cross-functional work is a very powerful position to be in. It's also important that all your employees understand who the customer is. Otherwise, how can they work effectively together? So companies that really excel in being customer-centric and delivering value to customers put a lot of emphasis on educating their employees to who the customer is. There's a company called teecom.com, Teecom.com, and they do this awesome job of onboarding their employees with an understanding of who the customer is, and then also frequently doing role playing around customer challenges. And those are cross-functional role playing. And you don't always get to play the role that you're actually working in. So the idea is to understand the customer better, understand the customer needs better, and understand how to work together as a cross-silo or cross-functional team to deliver what the customer needs. And if questions do come up and in the chat, I can't monitor the chat, but I'd be happy to answer questions as they come up. So what is customer experience? If we're talking about delivering a compelling customer experience, what do we mean by that? And I've seen the term used differently in different circumstances. When the topic of customer journey first came out in the larger marketing space, it was really focused on how do you get the customer to transact? And then once the customer transacts, the customer success team takes over to help make sure that the customer is retained and happy with the product. I like the concept of customer experience because it really represents the customer's interactions with the full company through every stage of their relationship with the company or the customer life cycle, from when you're attracting them, when they contact you, whether it's via the web or in other ways, they're reviewing your product, they're engaging, they're using your product, they're seeking support, or perhaps your product or service is coming to end of life. Another way to think of this, and there's a lot of different life cycles or phases depending on the company: discover, choose, order, install, use, get support, retire the product. You can gain or lose a customer at any one of these phases, and that's really important to keep in mind, and that's why, again, cross-silo work is very, very important. I had a friend who wanted to buy a bunch of, she wanted to buy like 15 digital photo frames for her family. And being a smart consumer, she went out and did a lot of research on the web about photo frames, digital photo frames. She found the perfect product. It was aesthetically pleasing. It had all the functional specs that she wanted. She ordered 2. One of them came broken. The amount of effort she had to put into finding somebody to help her with this problem, the wait time on the phone, because she couldn't, there was no like easy return policy on the web, waiting for hours literally to get somebody on the support team to pick up the phone and talk to her, only to receive a replacement product that was a refurbished product, not a new product. It had scratches. It didn't meet, you know, the need that she had to give beautiful gifts to people. So instead of buying 15, she ended up returning the 2 that she had paid for and, you know, getting refunded. Never did business with that company. Perfect product, wonderful specs, all the research she did. Support was terrible. She couldn't do business with that company. You can gain or lose a customer at any phase in this journey or experience. So the important thing, if you're talking about developing a compelling customer experience, is that you assure that value is delivered throughout the life cycle at every touch point with the company, whether it's product use, which many of us are very deeply concerned with. Yeah, Kimberly.
Question coming in. Can you think of cross-functional team colleagues as internal customers?
Well, I like to say there's no internal customers, there are internal collaborators. What's important is that the full organization is aligned on a shared set of goals. And the most natural and neutral place for setting goals across a large or an organization, a complex organization, is the customer. You know, we all have the customer in common, and without the customer and without happy customers, there's no business, there's no jobs, there's no joy of creating.
And I want to thank you. You know, you feel free to put your own opinions in the chat. You can chat with each other while Ellen Grace is sharing her insights. We got 21 people here, 21 brains. Let's use them all.
Yes, and I like, you know, I learn every time I present or engage with people on these topics. So I want to just reinforce Kimberly's suggestion. Please do have an active, you know, ideas and chat and sharing of your experiences and your ideas. I want to talk about what I mean by in context of the larger ecosystem. A lot of times when we're designing products and services, we think about, you know, our market, the market for pens, the market for hiking boots, the market for laptops. And we don't think about the larger market that the customer or the consumer of that product is existing in, the larger ecosystem they're existing within. A couple of examples. I worked with a very well-known large software company on a new product that they were looking at. I was working with the engineering team. The use case was, hey, I run into Kimberly in the hall and hey, let's have a spontaneous design session. This was a sketch tool. They were demonstrating, this was pre-iPad, and they were demonstrating the use case carrying around this big Wacom tablet with an attached pen and a laptop. It's like carrying 2 pizza boxes through the hallway. That's not a circumstance, that's not a hardware context that would really enable those spontaneous design conversations that they were designing for. So tablet computing at the time was very limited availability, very expensive, and primarily pretty unstable. HP had a product at the time, and people that I knew who were using that product, it was crashing all the time. And I suggested to this software company that their product would not be viable until tablet computing got better. And when the iPad was introduced, it was a much more appropriate time for them to, you know, introduce their product. So I know we talk a lot on the product side and product management and in engineering and about time to market. We also need to consider market timing. Is the market ready for your product? Are your customers ready for that product? Or does the product need to be something different in order to be viable in that time frame? So ecosystem's important. Another story, you know, we're all really used to the convenience of frozen food, but when Birdseye first invented their frozen food process, there were no freezers in stores. There were no trucks that could transport frozen food. So they actually had to go out and actively work with grocery stores, trucking companies, et cetera, to build out that ecosystem so that their product could effectively go to market. All right. it takes a team. If you're talking about every single touch point, every single point of that customer's experience delivering high value, it really needs to be well coordinated. And it takes a team that understands what the customer needs and that can hand off seamlessly between those different phases of the product experience. And thus, my first framework, the wheel of value. So somebody asked, what do I mean by framework? It's really logical structures that can help create the space and support the conversation around effectively working together to deliver value to the customer. And the wheel of value is the first framework that I invented. It's very interesting because when I was a hardcore product manager, when I would ask people how do they see the role of product management inside a company? Invariably, somebody would do a drawing where they showed product management in the center, and they would show all these other teams around product management, more like a Tinker Toy. I don't know if everybody's familiar with Tinker Toy. And so it was all, okay, product management has to talk to engineering, and then product management has to talk to marketing, and then product management has to coalesce all that. And I would say quite frequently, and probably lost a few fans when I would say this, I said, well, that's very nice for our egos as product managers to think that we sit at the center of the company. But it's really the role of a product manager, I believe, to put the customer at the center of the company and to help everybody in the company understand who that customer is, what they need, value, and are willing to pay for, so that the products, the business, the services can be more successful. So the wheel of value is a framework that I use in workshops and conversations around which the team can discuss and document everybody's contribution to value. You know, it's no longer my job as a marketing person is to write brochures. I was in a meeting back in the day when I was at Silicon Graphics, and I was in a meeting with a bunch of engineers, and I was trying to be there and represent the customer and make some suggestions about what we needed to do with the product. And literally an engineer looked at me and said, "Don't you have a brochure to write?" And I said, "I'm sorry, that's not my job. I don't write brochures." So it was a little shocking to me. That same engineer, in some other meeting, when I asked him, who's he designing the product for? He said, well, people like me. And I said, no, you're not the customer. The customer is a different person than you. So we have to make sure that we're really understanding the customer and that we're positioning ourselves and understanding for ourselves what our role is in delivering value. If you don't have a strong operations team, then you certainly can't have an awesome or compelling customer experience. If the product fails or it doesn't perform to spec or whatever else, there's a failure there, right? Sometimes I've heard people say that only sales and engineering contribute to revenue. Everybody else is overhead. I hope by the end of this conversation, you'll see that that's total bullshit. All right, so what is it that you in finance, you as an engineer, you in operations, service and support, what's the value that you're delivering to the customer? And then understanding that value and the value everybody else brings, what is your need? What do you need from them? I mean, certainly service and support, the value they deliver is to help assure solving challenges, fixing problems. A lot of times when companies do look at service and support as overhead, they look at it as a cost center instead of a value center. And service and support people are measured more about getting customers off the phone, finishing the phone call, or pushing them through the queue than they are on how satisfied the customers are. But what they might need from other people, maybe from marketing, they need a better understanding of who the customer is. From engineering, they certainly need to know what's coming down the pike from a product standpoint. They need early access to the product so they can understand it well enough to support it. Those types of dependencies should be identified. And then what do you offer to other teams? Again, service and support can offer insight to the kind of problems and challenges that customers are having in use of the product. Service and support might also offer insight to the kudos the customers, the excitement that the customer has. And that's something that they can share with marketing to improve marketing communications, market messaging. Again, early days, my very first concept meeting as a product manager with a bunch of engineers, I invited customer support to come into the conversation. And the engineers were kind of side-eyeing me, and they were like, why are they here? And I know this has changed in a lot of organizations since this particular story, but I was like surprised. I was like, well, they talk to customers every day. They might be able to give us an insight into the biggest challenges our customers are having with our current products. Then once you understand how everybody contributes to value, what they need from you and what they can offer to you and your team and what you can offer to them, you're in a much better position to collaborate and to also coordinate resources to focus on customer needs. Does anybody want to ask questions or have any comments about the Wheel of Value as a framework for collaborating? John Smithers raised his hand.
Yeah, there are some comments in the chat from Ron and Susan as well. So why don't we have a few comments from John Smithers, Ron, Susan, and Malika?
Shall I start? Or?
Sure.
Well, I haven't really dealt with customer support within my own organization, but as somebody who shops on Amazon, I've dealt with other companies' customer support. And too often it seems like they don't know what the hell they're doing, or, you know, they're really just a subcontractor who doesn't really deal with the product, doesn't know the product. How do you overcome that? Yeah.
Well, that I would suggest that the executives have a misunderstanding of the value of customer support, and they are looking to reduce costs. They're again looking at customer support as a cost center. And there's a variety of ways that, and not all companies actually engage in customer research, but it's important to be able to measure the satisfaction or dissatisfaction of your customers, not just overall, but at these different stages in the relationship. So you can better understand where the weaknesses are that the company has, and the investment can be made to improve that. So when I've worked with companies where there's obvious weaknesses in different phases, you know, we really try to find the evidence, and we try to come up with solutions. And hopefully you have an executive team that can be supportive of shoring up those weaknesses and improving the customer experience overall. And I think it's also really valuable to have some of the people who are making these decisions do secret shopping. So they can experience it and find out how frustrating it can be. You all might be familiar with something called Net Promoter Score. And I know a lot of companies use Net Promoter Score to measure customer satisfaction. And Net Promoter Score in the simplest form is, would you recommend us to your friends and colleagues? And I had a client who had a pretty reasonable Net Promoter Score in aggregate. But when we dove in a little bit deeper, we found out that literally half the people who took the survey loved the company, and half the people who took the survey were very dissatisfied. And so the average actually looked pretty good. So if you don't go past just that one number, if you don't dig in a little bit deeper and find out why, you know, oh, there's this big, huge difference, there's this big disparity, and what are the differences in the experience, what are the differences in those audiences that lead them to these different experiences, then the Net Promoter Score is not really that useful. It's, like, you know, that's too much data. Go ahead.
My head's in the oven, my feet are in the freezer. On average, I feel fine.
That's right. Well, at least the fire's going and you're not just inhaling gas. So were there other questions that were coming up in the chat, Kimberly, that we wanted to address now?
Yes, what about any comments from Ron Lichty or Bill Walker, or feel free to unmute yourself, Malika.
I think mine was just the observation that Ellen Grace was making, that an engineer said he was creating the product for himself, and having attended having been part of a member of the UI UX customer experience community probably 25 years ago, the group of people who, aside from product managers, spend more time trying to understand users, understand customers than anyone else, were handing out buttons that said, "We are not the customer." And you got to figure that if that group of people isn't the customer, none of us for sure are the customer.
That's right. That's right. And sometimes, I mean, in the early days of Silicon Graphics, you know, some of our designers and engineers, they could reasonably equate themselves with the target customer. But as we tried to go more mass market, as we tried to provide tools to a broader audience, then you really do have to get out of your own head. So thank you for that, Ron. And Belle, you said something about, I read your chat real quick, but maybe you wanted to reiterate it.
Yeah, I think Susan and I were both seconding your point about value being a more important focus. You can't save your way to success. You can cut your costs to zero, but if the thing you create at zero cost has no value, it doesn't matter.
Right, right. And sometimes we see companies cutting costs, cutting their marketing team to the bare bones, and then suddenly wondering why their leads have dried up and why their sales team isn't being productive. I mean, let's understand everybody's role.
Right. And I guess that's where my initial comment came, and I love value versus cost, because I've worked for several companies where they were really siloed and everybody thought they knew what the customer wanted. And they wouldn't listen to anybody other's point of view. I think Matthew Cahill would call that self-bias, self-centered bias.
Yes.
And I go back to you're respecting your customer, but if you can, not everybody believes in collaboration. They think it's us against them because everybody has different metrics.
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
if you can show respect for their point of view and ask some questions, eventually they'll start trusting you and start collaborating, and then the customer wins in the end. But you have to bring everybody into that funnel, like the photo that you published on LinkedIn, the graphic, have everybody move together.
Right.
Great.
Thank you. Yes. And it's interesting. I was working with a company very successful, and sometimes when you get inside these companies, you wonder about their success and how long-lived it's going to be. And I was working with a team. I was helping to productize engineering tools for developers. And I was working with this team, and the leader of the team started talking about those people. And I was like, okay, who do you mean by those people? Well, anybody else who's not on this team. Do you mean inside the company? So yeah, it was very bizarre to me that there was that level of toxicity between that team and other people who they needed those teams in order for their efforts to be successful. So it's very challenging to help people understand and to break down that type of, and to shift that type of culture. It does require executive sponsorship, to shift in executive thinking, and it does require sometimes small bites and incremental change.
So Ellen, out of interest in that specific case, what was that engineering team's leadership relationship or with the rest of the executives in the company? Was that in conflict or?
Yes, the challenge was that, part of the challenge was that team and that team's leadership were not well respected. And that translated then down into people at the action level not feeling respected and appreciated and resenting it.
I don't know, it kind of reminds me of the age-old argument between software and hardware. It's like, come on, people. I mean, without the software, the hardware is just a brick. And without the hardware, the software is a wisp of smoke.
Yes, yes, exactly. All right, so that's also awesome. And now that's a good setup for us to go into our breakout. We're going to be randomly assigned to breakout rooms. And just for context, put yourself in I wanted to find a product that we could, at least most of us, relate to as a consumer. And so think about, the Amazon Fire Stick, the Roku, those various small appliances that you can connect to your smart TV. and do streaming via. Think about, in order to really understand the role of different teams, sometimes you do have to have that customer empathy. And so that's why I've chosen this particular exercise. I think you can empathize with people who want to augment their television or their screen experience with multiple streaming services. Probably most of us, if not all of us, have utilized products like that enable that. So we'll be randomly assigned to breakout rooms: manufacturing, marketing, sales, operations, finance, partners, service and support. And the goal is to discuss within your breakout room how your team, the team that you are, not the team that you operate on in your normal day-to-day life, but the team that you're temporarily on in the breakout room. There's a Google sheet. Oh, when I talk about partners, again, partners is also frequently forgotten, right? We don't think of our partners as people that we collaborate with to deliver value. And in some organizations, there's maybe even resentment towards partners because there's a strong not invented here syndrome. Partners can be distribution partners, sales partners, they can be technical partners, they can be supply chain partners of a variety of types. So when you're thinking about your role as a partner to delivering value to this joint customer, that's what we want to try to get through. And so it might be we complete the technology puzzle, or we make sure it gets into the hands of the customer. There's a lot of different ways that a partner would participate in that. So let's just go down the line, order of the list, and just report back about how your team helps deliver value to the customer. So manufacturing, would you like to start?
Yeah, so the first one that came up was just a support iteration. So just to enable like easy prototyping or whatever, so you can get samples out and get feedback as soon as possible. Then depending on how far from the customer we are, but if possible, try to get as close to the customer as possible. So talk to them directly or just be very active with whoever is proxying for them. Just general quality control, like try to make a good quality product so that you don't have to do any refunds. Compatibility and like compliancy. So you design your product so that it's actually compatible with wide range of target devices or whatever the market happens to be. So that if it's a TV dongle, it works for TVs that are older than 1 year or whatever.
That's great.
Well, security, like IoT, everything is connected nowadays, so security has to be kind of on top of mind. Account for cost, so don't make a product that's over-engineered but does the thing and is still something that keeps the company growing and testing. Just I guess a constant feedback cycle from iteration, and just ensure that in every step you're not introducing any issues. And yeah, flexibility was already there, and maybe the last one is then packaging. So depending on what kind of product it is, you might have to store it, or you might have to try to warehouse them, or just make them really beautiful so that it's part of the customer experience, but also consider the cost of the packaging if it's a very cheap product, so that it doesn't ruin the overhead of the profits.
Does anybody else want to offer any other suggestions that manufacturing needs to concern themselves with for delivering value to the customer?
What is rage wrap?
Yeah.
Oh, it's that like stiff plastic that you like have to break out the scissors, and then it cuts you more than you cut it, and yeah.
And they have to be some heavy-duty scissors too.
Well, I think the main idea of rage wrap is really theft, loss prevention more than anything else, not
That's
protecting.
right. They're not thinking about the customer. They're thinking about cost and inventory loss. Right. The other thing, I recently did some research on consumer buying habits and how they're changing generationally. And younger consumers are more concerned with supply chain and sustainability. So manufacturing teams are having to kind of rethink some of their supply chain as well as packaging to make sure that, we're all seeing less and less plastic peanuts and more brown paper in the packages we receive, things like that. So the consumer concern is around supply chain and sustainability, and a manufacturing team has to make sure they're sourcing from an ethical supply chain. And that's funny. Well, I've got always stories. I have a client who's worried about ethically sourcing coffee, but then when he was thinking about supply chain and where he wanted to manufacture, it's just like wherever it's cheapest. I'm like, well, that's kind of not consistent with your brand.
And how about design? I mean, does that fit in with manufacturing? Because a lot of the time the design is left to the manufacturing partners.
But I think the manufacturing team often has to help assure that the design is manufacturable, and sometimes has to consult on the design to make sure that the design is manufacturable, and also that the design as created does keep within the cost parameters for the product.
Well, one of the things with the rage wrap too is, again, that's more of an in-store phenomena. So I've found there are some options for buying stuff without the rage wrap. So you get to save on that in terms of the cost of the product, and also in terms of stuff you have to throw away.
Great.
I think that rage wrap is a great example too of a nuance in who the customer is. So for example, if you're thinking of the customer as being the store that you are selling the product to, they are very interested in anti-theft.
Yes.
But the end consumer, not your customer, but your customer's customer, where it's going to ultimately, that's where the rage comes in, because your prevention and in thieves taking it is prevention from your customer using it, at least without becoming a bloody mess.
That's an awesome point, Rob. And I don't know how we can hear you because it says you're muted, but that's just a technical distraction. Yeah, time. So it's awesome that we have this perspective now on how manufacturing helps deliver value to the customer, and sometimes might be misguided in terms of who the customer is and doesn't always fulfill the needs all across the value chain. So can we hear from marketing?
All right, so that was Denny and I. The biggest thing that came out of the marketing was two-way communication, just being kind of the liaison between the firm and the customers, making sure that everybody's on the same page. We used your hiking boots example. We'd want to make sure that marketing is marketing running shoes, and everybody's getting running shoes, right? Not the hiking boots. So that's where that line 10, two-way communication in all channels falls in. Let's see, and communicate effectively to the rest of the organization. And then just rinse and repeat. So just want to make sure that we do that over and over, and just make sure everybody's communicated, understands what we're trying to do. And that's going to make marketing's job a lot easier, right? If everybody's on the same page.
I like the point on line 11 about nudging the organization from provider push to consumer pull. And certainly in the modern world, consumer pull is much more important because consumers do have so much choice, and they have so much control, and they have so much access to information. Operations?
Well,
oh, I'm sorry. Did you have more to add, Denny?
yeah, just one little quick one on that point is notice that even the value wheel is built around the functions in our organization, reflecting our expertise. And that organization does not reflect the consumer pull perspective. And so many of the team-oriented activities that are becoming popular are trying to establish a consumer pull perspective to use as the organization in the company.
Well,
I think that's a very interesting proposition.
That is interesting. And I want to just clarify regarding your point on the wheel of value. The customer is at the center. So the customer is actually the gravitational pull. And we need to understand what they need from us in order to effectively deliver and enable them to access the value. And if it's a matter of making sure that we're enabling the pull and paying attention to the pull and aware of the pull, that is certainly something that the customer needs, wants, and will value from us, and needs to be in our customer model. So thank you for that contribution.
I think as far as marketing goes, the word resonate comes to mind. One of the things marketing should be looking for is what messaging resonates with customers, and it feeds back to well, what should we have in the product that makes the product resonate with customers. The messaging and product can be very, very intertwined from a resonation standpoint.
Yes.
And if I can just step in here, we're having such a fantastic discussion. I hate to scoot it along, but we have about 5 tabs left and we're quickly running out of time.
Well, Kimberly said that we had 15 extra minutes, but I mean, we can move faster. That's not, regardless. Do we have a hard stop at 6:30?
We have 15 minutes of break time. So if people want to leave and take a break, we'll lose them. So that's the buffer. So that's all the buffer we have.
Okay.
So, people have to go and do whatever they need to do. So.
All right. Operations. Let's hear from operations, and we'll continue through the break. And if people need to leave, we'll understand that.
Well, I mean, from an operational perspective, what we suggested is that, this is really a connector point between a lot of parts of the supply chain, between customers, manufacturing, because this is the group that a lot of the time deal with partner problems as well. So, so there's a lot of feedback that can be given on how operational processes can be improved, which can be fit in even in service and support, how they deal with the different aspects. Help to get the operational process as well defined, because there's many touching points with the customers, documentation and collaboration across the teams, because of not over engineering ideas for supply chain options, because a lot of the time that also is touched by operations. Product messaging improvements, because depending on where it goes, there might be different aspects in the distribution side. Media partners, I think a lot of time when people think of consumer products, there's a whole value chain of additional things on top of that. So if you look at something like Roku, they've got buttons on there for Netflix and the others. So if something starts going wrong there, it's the operational team, and then new technology improvements come in. This likely is the team that starts putting in the processes on how to support that properly first.
That's awesome.
And then bot processes, that's my pet peeve in customer support with a lot of consumer electronics is these things just don't listen to customers. So how do you bring the bots in and then pass over to human action faster and support?
Thank you for attending, Ming Lam. Okay, great. So let's move on to sales.
I was the only person in the sales room, and I think that sales is supposed to solve customer problems by getting them what they need, make sure that the value is perceived to be more than what they paid, and that we understand what do they want more than just a product, technology. What do they want? Delivery, quality, what matters? Reliability, cost, business strategy. Do they care if what we give them is environmentally sustainable? We need to really, truly understand the customer's needs. That's my 5 cents.
And I just want to add to that, not only understand the customer's needs, but make sure that that's well communicated across all the different functional groups as part of the cross-silo collaboration.
So this is Sujan. So I was trying to say, to add something on the operations side, but I was on mute, of course. Oh. So just one thing, I think it ties back to what you just said, because there are different silos, there are different groups, and there should be overlap how we do it. And one part of what we thought that part of operations is really how to unify all these different use cases that are touching points for customers, and how to organize all these processes so the information flows, so there is no disconnect between different groups, including the example that you gave earlier, like you have a problem with a product and you get something like lousy replacement. Well, that shouldn't happen, right? So there should be a communication flow so we know what kind of customers they're dealing with. So
yeah, that's awesome. Operations is a strong integration point across the organization. Can we go to the next?
Kimberly, we've got your email, I think. There we go.
Finance.
Finance. Jossie and I were in finance. Jossie just wrote a note saying that she had to bail out. So I'll speak for her, put words in her mouth. All right. So what the heck does a finance department do, and how can it possibly help customers? Well, we did observe that there are a number of indirect points, and a good example is the team working on the products. They're going to have to understand the bounds on pricing. If they're forced to lower the price, just how low can they go? And that'll be the finance department puts a lower bound. And there are also other ways, like there are all sorts of different models by which a customer might obtain the product or service. It isn't always just a buy. It might be a rent, a lease, or this or that. And so again, the finance department puts the outer parameters on what those costs ought to be and what the prices, the bounds of the pricing, because obviously you'd want to have better than your minimum. And development team, there are teams which develop a new product or service. What's their budget? How much money do they have to work with? If they're going to build a widget or design it or outsource parts of it, how much money do they have to work with? Again, that's the finance department. And in any company, besides designing a bunch of new stuff, you've also got maintenance and operations on your existing product line, and you have to balance the effort that goes into each. And finance can provide guidance there too. Probably not absolute rules, but at least guidance. So these are the 4 contributions of the finance department that we figured out.
Thank you for that. Awesome. So moving to partners.
I don't know if Susan wants to do this or.
John, whichever you want it. You want me to run through it, or do you want?
I'll run through it, but I will say that Susan was the primary driver on this. She was a lot better with this than I was. Fill in technology gap in terms of the IP owner. You might have to, like, another company is the primary manufacturer of the FPGA, say, and and so you might buy that from them or have them modify it to work with your product. Customize, adapt technology, same thing. Sales channel, catalog, retail relationships, integration, bundler, i.e., you want to partner with a television manufacturer to sell your product with the TV, or integrate it with the TV. Software developer might work with a separate company that does specialize in software development to help design your product interface. Integrated customer service. I'm not quite sure what to say about that one. And supply chain. I think the lesson from this for me is really learning what the other guys doing with their responsibilities, so I can develop my own better relationship with them.
Yeah,
awesome.
Real quickly, the integrated customer service was if somebody's going to bundle it with a television purchase, I as a consumer don't want to have to call 2 different people for customer service. If I call the television manufacturer because I think it's a television challenge and they say, oh no, it's the Roku, then I have to hang up and call Roku's customer service. And then I end up being the referee between the 2 companies. So if we could get one company, to provide that integration.
I'm a little late joining to this, but boy, this is too close to life.
Oh, who was that?
Tom DeLora. I listened, I'm like going, oh my God.
Well, we're so
if
glad
you got to show up at the virtual happy hour if you want to avoid this stuff.
Yeah.
So, last but not least, if somebody can report back from service and support, then we can.
Just one quick comment on the integrated customer support, and it's not necessarily a single organization, but the key there is be able to hand over the customer to the other company.
That's right. The handoff should not be the customer's responsibility. It should be well orchestrated across the different partners.
That's where a lot of the design and especially operational support process design falls through the cracks. They don't think about the partner ecosystem.
That's right. All
And
right.
the partners
Oh,
need to
also-
work together. Somebody has to integrate all the different partners.
That's right.
Telephone hell.
Also, someone is asking for a book recommendation at some point, so thank you, Ellen.
Okay.
Next one, service and support, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, I've got just a quick, I'll go so fast through the next slides, you won't even believe it. Service and support.
Well, service and support was Rob and me. And we were fundamentally realizing that we were at the front lines of talking to customers who are using our product. And from that standpoint, we could funnel feedback and issues from customers back to the product team. We could funnel customer ideas and wants to the product team. We could answer customers' questions and get customers up and running, and we could improve their perceptions of the product and the company in the moment. We could increase customer effectiveness with our product. We could identify common coding and usability defects and patterns in the issues. We could write FAQs to help customers help themselves and other documentation, and we could support prospects in becoming customers and not bailing on our product as they ran into issues.
That's awesome.
There's also here the potential to improve the product with this feedback.
Yes, 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 yes.
Well, I think, and as a funny question, does it? How do you get the engineers to listen? Sometimes I find engineers don't really listen. Again, I'm sorry, I'm late. I was late.
Well, that's all right. Well, that's also a cultural thing. And one of the things we're talking about, the frameworks that I've created also support workshops. And this first exercise that we did is an important part of the Wheel of Value workshop. And the next step, again, you would be presenting back to this cross-silo team so that everybody could start to understand everybody's role and also the challenges that you have with the roles. This would now be the time when some of those challenges might come up. And because there's a facilitator there, it's easier to have those conversations about, well, our roadblock is that the engineers aren't listening to us. So, you know, and then there's various other steps. But we've gone past our time, and I really appreciate people staying a little longer. I'm going to just blast through these next slides. So this is how companies often look at their customer, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, right? It's, I have a view of the customer, oh, it feels like a rope. Oh, it's a wall, it's a fan. So what I talk about is going from the elephant to the jewel. And the jewel is a nice metaphor because it's multifaceted, so it acknowledges that each of us in our different roles do have a different perspective on the customer, but it also then helps us see that that is one entity to a certain extent. I mean, somebody brought up segmentation earlier. We're also going to talk about, don't conflate customer with user. Many of us and much of our conversation has been centered on the user. But when we're thinking about messaging or we're thinking about different processes, there's also the decider. And the decider could be a very different person than the user. There's also the buyer. So in an enterprise situation, for example, the decider might be a VP, the buyer might be the purchasing department, and the user might be an engineer or, you know, an employee in a different functional area. Then there's the influencers. So when we're planning an awesome experience, we have to, it's really multidimensional. So
there's a guy at the top who goes, "Make it so," and you're like, "What?"
Yes, yes. Yeah, I always say the further away you get from doing the task, the easier you think it is. So expand and refine your view of the customer. The user experience is very important. That's the interactions that specific users have with the products and services. Sometimes we forget about the context within which that product or service is going to be used. I had a client in the headset business, audio headsets. They started in the business headsets. So they were very kind of steeped in the idea of the user being tethered to a phone. So there's one use case, one user, one headset, one product. And I helped them, I helped introduce to their consumer team the idea of the day in the life. How does the customer experience audio throughout the day? And they went from part of shifting their perspective on the customer, helped them go from being 25% below on their revenue to doubling their revenue in the subsequent year. Customer experience, we spent a lot of time talking about that. And we also talked earlier about the customer market and business view, the larger context within which the customer operates, not just your market, but what are their business challenges and what's the larger context, whether it's economic, you know, social trends. I like to talk about how opportunities exist at the intersection of trends. So you need to understand what are the trends that impact your customer and their ability to buy what you have to offer. I have a white paper on this I'm happy to share. Then I want people to really expand their thinking about value. If you have an opportunity, do a search on elements of value. This is awesome research that Bain & Company did. In tech, we often talk about functional value, and there's different types of value, and some of that came out in the conversation we had around the different roles people have. You know, a very important value is it easy to do business with your company? Will my purchasing your product, whether it's on behalf of a company or on behalf of myself as a consumer, will it enhance my reputation, right? I mean, people have a lot of choices. What's the cool choice? And are you appealing to the cool thing? You know, if it's a difference between like a 99-cent Bic or a Mont Blanc, that has very different value and not just functional value to the customer.
And I want to point out one thing in there. It's something I'm doing personally, which is now my company's moving into supporting open source products, and the value add to actually what you get in the open source world, which is somebody who has enterprise experience. It's very important.
Yes, that's awesome. So there's also that perspective that
right.
you know, we talk a lot about consultative selling. It's not just, okay, it's the cheapest thing out there, I'll buy it. If you're talking about high ticket items, consultative selling is much more important. So, and this chart's easily available. Again, if you just do a search on elements of value, there's a B2C or business to consumer and a business to business version. It's awesome research. Then I just want to talk about very quickly, how do you work cross-functionally? What's the framework for defining a compelling customer experience? And what we have to understand at different phases in the relationship is, what's the customer's intent? What do they need? And I also want to point out, there's been a lot of studies that prove this point, though we do get pushback from some people. Human beings make emotional decisions. What's the emotion that your customer might be experiencing when they enter that phase of the relationship? What's the emotion you want them to experience as they move into the next phase, right? So, you know, they come in curious, maybe. They exit interested and when they go into the contact, and then momentum. What do they need? What does the customer need from the company in order to move to the different phases? So how do you generate that momentum? Then very quickly, in the different silos or functional groups, what's the action that your team needs to take, again, in the different phases? What are the activities? What's the handoff between phases or between teams? And what's the leverage? This is a very neglected thing. When you're really working collaboratively across the silos, you start to find those points of leverage. So a lot of software products now have built-in gathering of statistics, usage statistics. That information is rarely shared with other parts of the organization, but it can give you real insight into what are the functional aspects of your product that the customer is valuing because they're using it a lot, or it might give you information into what are the the places that they're having difficulty, so they're avoiding that. Those two different types of information could be leveraged by the marketing team, the support team, the sales team. So when you're working collaboratively.
And the engineering team, and the engineering team.
Yes, of course. I guess that's an awesome ad. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I'm dealing with this. I'm sorry.
No. I assumed that and also have made it explicit. So I appreciate that you participated and made it explicit. That was a very good.
Feeling left out.
We have to stop. We have to stop. Sorry, I'm sorry. Okay.
That's all right. That's all right. The breakout rooms took a lot longer.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience.
This is what I see oftentimes.
Back to Rob. Sorry, Rob. We've used up the whole break, and now we are supposed to start the next piece, which I think maybe there's some flexibility.
I think there's some flexibility in this whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Laura, I'm going to make you a host so I can be less focusing on this because I'm messing up.
Oh. It's only 60 days in the quarantine. What's wrong with you, Kimberly?
So let's go ahead and
let's finish up.
Formal wrap on this and give our thanks to Ellen Grace. I think there were some really fabulous discussions in this that really illustrated that points about everyone's adding customer value and how those communication and understanding of how those other groups fit together and keeping that customer view is really important. And once again, this has been the Leadership Academy portion of the SVELC. We do have meetings on the third Thursday of the month, the Leadership Academy, and our main meeting, which for those of you not watching on YouTube will be coming up in just a few minutes. And for those watching on YouTube, well, you can just go off and click on the other link. Once again, really thankful to everyone that's been here and those of you that have watched online.
And thank you so much for the opportunity to learn with you all.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen Grace.